Hey, I'm Matt Kanai. I'm the lead developer of Hanako, Honor, and Blade from Impact Games, in which I'm a co-founder.
So Matt, talk a little about your studio, Impact Games. Like you guys have done some stuff before, smaller things. Like give us a little insight about your studio and the work you've done before this.
Impact Games is a tiny indie studio that myself and my two partners started back in college. We kind of created it around Hanako, which originally was a college project that started way back in 2008. And we kind of just made it to, at the time, we're like, all right, we're just going to make this LLC to make the game feel more legitimate to us. And hopefully we'll build it into something that we can, have full budgets to make more games as time goes on, as Hanako hopefully does well in the future. And then fast forward, almost 14 years, here we are finishing up that initial project. But, I've worked in the game industry for the last going on 11 years now, kind of during the day, and then at night I switch into Impact Games mode and work on Hanako. It's kind of just how my career's gone the whole time, just about.
So like, what would you say is, you've been in game dev for 14 years, but this has been a side project for most of that time and a project of passion. Like talk about like the development of this game and how you've reached to this point, because it looks really good at that point in its development cycle.
Thanks. It's been a slow burn kind of grind. It's when you work on a project for that long, technology's changing. So every 3 or 4 years, we look back at the game, we're like, ooh, this is looking dated. That's been like on the dev side, one of the harder things. Like, all right, we got to constantly, it's like leapfrog. You get one map looks really good. That's and like, oh, it's the newest map. It looks great. And you go back to the oldest map and be like, ooh, that's fallen behind. Let's get that one updated. And it's just constant leapfrogging of all the content. I'm going to kind of back up just a little bit. It's on the personal side of things, and it started as a game as a tribute. That's been kind of the life force of the whole project. That's been the one constant that's kept it going the whole time. It's we'll get deep on it, I think, as we go on, but at least for me personally, there's no way it would have made it 14 years if it wasn't for that deep inner drive that I have to finish what I started. I kind of, since the game's dedicated to my mom, since she, passed away back in 2007, and then I started the game right after, and I had this it kind of just came to me it was like my first or second winter break in college. It was like, all right, I'm gonna write this game. It's gonna be a samurai war metaphor where one clan represents her, the other clan represents the cancer that took her from me. And the whole game's just going to be a metaphor for that battle. And I also it's been a kind of a sandbox for dealing with grief and trying to take all that energy and turn it into something good and something positive, and some place for me to kind of creatively and artistically explore grief and how do I deal with this? Is the closest person to me at the time. And also, as time has gone on, it's been such a long-term project that most of the dev teams lost a parent's cancer at this point. So it's become more than just about, the one person. And we had a professor pass away that kind of like, he just bulldozed the path for us to work on this in college. And, we lost him shortly after we graduated. And it's just this living, breathing tribute. There's a lot of art in the game, that little Easter eggs, paintings of lost loved ones, like in certain castles, and every map kind of represents different things. And it kind of turned into, I kind of designed it this way on purpose. It's a weird thing. I was kind of like, I can't have closure on that loss until I finish the project. And that's kind of what's made it make it to this point. It's a long answer to that question.
No, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, like, is it difficult doing that? Because you're in early access, but early access games can stay that way for many years. I mean, Fortnite was in early access for years. Ark was in early access for years. Like, because you are a small indie studio and you have that control to go in and change and set a release date when you want to make those milestones, does it make it more difficult because you don't have like a deadline to meet in a way?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's something that we've learned in the last 3 or 4 years. Like once we got to early access, And as I've gotten a little bit older, it's gotten harder to work late. I used to do 7 p.m. to 4 a.m. 7 days a week on Hanako after my job, wake up at 9, go to work 9 to 6, come home. I had an hour of rest, and maybe I'd sleep in on weekends. Like it was really, really hard and torturous sometimes. And once I met my wife, she's like, "No, you don't have any balance. You need to work like 10 to 2 and then take a couple of nights off." And I've been doing that since we met. And I could probably get more done in that 4-hour slice. But as a lot of the developers that have been with us for a long time, like start families, I want to start a family. We're, in that process. And there's a point where you have to say, all right, we have to ship this thing. And the longer the project's gone on, the smaller it's gotten in scope. That's been the hardest thing to learn. Is it's easy to say, oh yeah, I want to take my 5 things from my 5 favorite games and combine them and it'll be the best game ever. And it's just not how it works. And we've had really smart developers that have said, hey, I'm not staying on this project if we don't down scope it. In college, we had our kind of eyes to the sky. It's like, we're going to have, 3 campaigns and 8 classes and all this stuff. And it's like, nope, going to shrink it down. And it's, we stuck to our 4 classes. Let's make them as good as we can. We have 7 maps. Let's make them as good as we can. We have 4 game modes. Make them, solid and do our best to have a very polished minimum viable product is kind of the term that we use all the time. To make it really solid. And then we release it, hopefully it does well, and all the resources and sales that come in will decide, what we can do from 1.0 and onward.
It's funny because I look at your game and I see, like you said, a lot of inspirations games. I see a little bit of Overwatch. I see, of course, Bushido Blade. I see but for me, when I looked at your game, I saw a little bit of, I don't know if you play a lot of WoW, but Warsong Gulch and that kind of stuff, like these, you run in and kind of defend a point against other players for a bit and then move to the next point. Conquest, I guess, is another way to look at it. What were some of the inspirations when you were creating this game? I see a lot of different genres being meshed here together.
The first one I would say is probably the Jedi Knight series back from like the early 2000s. That was like my first PC game. That was when I was 13 and 14. Like I would just make maps in that editor for that game, as many as I could make. That's really why I got started making, it's like, all right, I'm gonna be a game developer. I was playing that game multiplayer. I still think it's some of the best melee of any game, even as old as those games are now. Shenmue 2 is kind of an inspiration, not so much the gameplay, but just the kind of the mood and soul of the game. There's little things here and there from other ones. I mean, I worked on Smite for like almost 7 years, and it's hard to not have that gameplay kind of like ingrained just because I spent so much time in that game as a developer. So there's some like MOBA inspiration in there a little bit. So we kind of wanted to have a fast pace, get in there and get into combat fast, kind of a FPS kind of feel. Not as structured as a MOBA, but still have some of that kind of per match leveling ability system, customizing your build, having that class-based kind of hybrid MOBA and like hybrid character-based, kind of like Overwatch is a good example, I would say, just so you can kind of customize. It's not just, you play the swordsman, it's this, everyone has to play the swordsman the same. It's like, no, you mix and match and kind of figure out a play style that fits your play style a little bit more.
It's funny you mentioned that you worked on Smite. One of the things about any game as a service, any competitive game is balance. And even with the 4 classes, how much balance work is that for your team to make sure that everything is equally paced, everything feels different, not one class is being used more than any other just because of X reasons?
That's kind of a twofold process. There's like, and I've seen this at every studio I've worked at, the developers always want it to be like super hardcore spreadsheet RPG, like really smart math design. And then the other school of thought is just field-based design. Like you play test all the time. You kind of you get a lot of feedback from players. You see kind of what they're complaining about and because they're going to tell you, oh man, this is OP. I'm tired of getting killed by this one ability all the time. And we're kind of in between. We have spreadsheets. We know how long it takes every class to kill every other class with what stance and what ability, what combination. But we kind of go off feel too. It's because that's like kind of what I'm used to designing in. It's a little more feel based and playtest iterative based. And we just kind of hit a point where we're like, all right, we're kind of happy with where it's at. We're going to see where classes go. And then there's another component, since it's a multiplayer game, is how your game performs, both like your actual hardware performance and server performance, and like hitboxes and all that. That's a whole like second layer of like, okay, well, your numbers can be sound, but if your hit detection's off, then you're gonna have like misses that you don't expect to get. So, you know, we had like our ninja class, for example, had really small hitboxes, and we didn't realize for a while most of his attacks were not registering. So like we just made hitboxes huge. One of our devs, our animator actually sent me, he's a huge like Smash and 2D fan. He said, hey, I'm gonna send you GIFs of this website that has GIFs of every attack and every hitbox in, I think it was Smash. And I had never seen like hitboxes in a fighting game. And I was like, they're huge. They're like 3 times the size of the dude. Like, what? And so we're like, you know, let's try it. Let's make our hitboxes giant and just see what happens. And we did. And all of a sudden, like everything was landing, and everyone was like, hey, did you like double your server frame rate or something? Hits feel amazing now. Like, oh, yes. Then we realized our tank and warrior class felt super overpowered. And then our ninja class felt right. We're like, oh, he's been missing all this time. Yeah, but people were like, he's just the expert class. He's the hard class. So, but no, he wasn't that hard. It was just his hit detection was bad.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works, because when you have an online game, doing that pinpoint accuracy stuff is a lot harder to do. It's not impossible, it's just really hard to do. So you have to make it a little bit bigger for more leeway for the server to make those connections, you know, because that's why so many first-person shooters are hit scan, right? Because, you know, it's easier to do it that way than it is to do the trajectory and have it hit, that kind of stuff, and how big is the box around your character. Also, frame data. People love their frame data in Smash. Have you guys gone through? I don't think you're that insane on it, or maybe you are. Do you look at frame data for the attacks and mess with those a little bit?
That's kind of like our whole combat system is animation driven. So it kind of is like we open an animation, we literally set the start and end within an animation of when like damage is allowed to be dealt. And we kind of have like abilities have a capsule like in front of the character that's kind of a bigger version of the character's capsule that abilities use. So it's kind of really what we found is the more lenient the server is with the tax, the better it is. Like if you go pure hardcore server has to verify everything, we don't want anyone cheating, it's going to feel pretty bad. You need the client to be like, all right, we're just going to kind of give you a pretty nice range on the feel, and the looser it is, the nicer the server is about it, the better it feels. And then you just kind of, that's another balancing thing too. Like, all right, well, we don't want to allow cheating, but we want it to feel like you're the host. We want everyone to feel like they're hosting the game in a way, which is hard because we'll have, you know, we play on like a East Coast server, and we'll have European testers come in at like 5 a.m. their time in some of our events. And like, hey, I'm getting like 200, 300 ping. It feels bad. I'm like, well, yeah, you're getting 200 or 300 ping across an ocean. Like we can't solve for that as developers.
Yeah, it's difficult, especially in a competitive game, to try to get, like, netcode has been a point of controversy, especially these last 2 years with Smash Ultimate being almost unplayable, according to most Smash professionals online, just because of the lag. Even if you're local, like even if you're close in the same hemisphere or the same side of the coast, it's been really interesting to see how like important rollback netcode is in a game, you know, and like why everyone should try to do their best to make it the best online experience as possible, even if the game is designed to play on a couch, you know, and not online. It's definitely a learning process, and not an easy one at that.
For sure. I mean, that's like the last couple months, that's kind of our sole focus is like our design's fully implemented for 1.0. We know what we want to do for years after. But it's like, all right, how finesse can we get our like server client stuff, netcode, whatever you want to call it? How smooth can we get that? How nice can we make, you know, rubber banding feel? How nice can our hits be? And it's just like, I feel like the last 50% of a game gets made in the last 10% of the time, like every game. AAA, indie, whatever.
Yeah, people don't understand that like you can do a closed beta or an open beta and limit that and still, you know, have a couple thousand people playing your game. But when there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, like things shift dramatically, and you don't really get that feedback until it's released or until you make it so accessible. Like your game is accessible to anyone who plays early access, which is good because you're getting that feedback now rather than the day before launch or midnight at launch.
Oh, for sure. I've gone through that on the other side, the AAA side, and that planning for scale is like I don't. It's pretty tough if you don't get those numbers. Like with Hanako, our early access hasn't been super huge. It's we rally our 1 week, once a week event and hope that we get a full game. We don't every week. We don't have full servers worth of data all the time. We're kind of projecting like, hey, we might get 16 people in a test that's a 24 max server. If we're, day one, we have, 100 full servers. We don't know what a 24 person server, how that extrapolates necessarily all the time. Like we were taking experiential, guesses and, have an AI backfilling and trying to finesse them to where they're human-like enough to kind of be passable. But that's kind of a challenge we'll have to face. What happens when we have, what happens if we get 10,000 people injecting into the player base at once? Can we spin up servers fast enough? What happens when we have hardware configurations, we had someone still running like dual 550 Ti's or something? I'm sure they'll let us know on the Steam forums or in reviews. It won't take long for it to reach us.
Yeah, is that hard for you to see that stuff as a game developer? Because I feel there's a lack of understanding what goes into game dev. Like no one releases something that's broken on purpose, and maybe it's not just as simple as fixing a line of code. Sometimes you have to go in and really trudge through that to find out what the problem is or how to fix it, and it's not an instant thing. That's got to be a little bit frustrating on your end, because if you don't know, people don't want to know how the steak is made, they just want it on the table, Yep.
Yeah, that's the hardest thing, I think, at least for me. Like I look at it and I always think the same thing, because for us, the one thing I've read probably 1,000 times now, and it's a chicken and egg thing. It's, hey, the game's really great. It looks great. We can't believe you hit this quality level for an indie game, but there's no one plays. Dead game. No one plays. I read it. If everyone that said that played, we would have full servers all the time. And it's a chicken and egg thing, because they know it's good, but we don't always have full games. And then other people see that and say, well, I'm not going to play an empty game, and then they don't play. But if there were, it's like it's a impossible thing to solve at once without just like Ninja or one of those huge streamers plays and like a ton of people want to play at once. Yeah, that's been our biggest challenge. And to read that constantly, it's like, well, we're developers. Like there's 7 of us, and I did the math the other day, because I was like, we just released that trailer last week, and I'm following comments and trying to engage with the community and be very available. And I have a partial solution to this problem, which I'll talk about in a second. But we're 7 people, and we average probably 10 hours a week each. And I probably do 30 or 40. But a 100-person game studio, they get 4,000 man hours of time a week put into a game. That takes us 57 weeks to reach 1 week of a 100-person studio. So extrapolated over 14 years, that's the equivalent of about 13 weeks of development of a 100-person studio. So my kind of thing was, what game have you ever seen that's playable after 13 weeks that a big studio's made, even though ours is super stretched out? And that math was kind of surprising. I never did that before. It was kind of a thought exercise. I was like, whoa. That's not very much dev time.
I think it's actually interesting too, because your small indie game is a competitive online game, and most, not all, but a lot of the games that we see nowadays are, they're narrative story-driven games, or they're procedurally generated games with like an addictive loop. Like a lot of people don't go competitive multiplayer right out of the gate, which is kind of interesting. I think, like you mentioned, I think your experience working on Smite helped you with that a lot in this development.
For sure. And I honestly think if we had a redo with hindsight and all the lessons, we probably would have done narrative single player too. And honestly, even from back in college, we were naive. We were just learning Maya and Max and all the software and what game design principles were. And my very inexperienced thought process was, well, doing cinematics and voiceovers and all that's going to be too expensive. Multiplayer will be easier to make a game quick. 14 years later, no, it's not easier. Getting something testable and in beta kind of is, but building a player base is so much harder than community, what you said. Just having like an addictive, nice gameplay loop with a really gripping story. Because really, what we want to do with the studio is make inspiring, kind of positive oriented, deep stories that make you think about your own path and your own kind of growth as a person. Like Shenmue hit me so hard with that when I was like 14 and played it for the first time. I was like, I have to give this feeling to as many people as possible and make them want to pursue, you know, positive endeavors in their lives. And it's really hard to do that in multiplayer. And like our whole thing is we want to move into kind of episodic single player and make more story driven kind of themed experiences, because if you look at how we did symbolism in Hanako in a multiplayer sense, it's really in the art and the levels and the way that the game world kind of pieces together. But it's not like, it would be way easier to hit the notes we want to hit with immersive dialogue and all that kind of stuff. But I think, you know, we are where we are and we designed it as best as we possibly could. And it's like, all it needs at this point is player base. I think the game it's like the field of dreams for games. Like we built the field, we're ready for the player ghosts to show up and just start playing.
So it's definitely hard. We were looking at statistics for Steam, and there are over 100 games released every week on Steam. 100 new games every week. So getting above that, I think the hardest part is just getting people away from Overwatch, away from Fortnite, away from these other games that they have thousands of hours into, and say, hey, try something new. If you could figure out that, you'd be a millionaire, you know?